Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, January 9th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 236 days. The game against Michigan in 320 days. We are not talking football today. We are talking basketball. Let's start with the good news on the basketball front. The Ohio State women overcame a 17-point deficit to beat Illinois 87-81. The Illini, another one of the top teams in the Big Ten. So far in 2023, the ladies have beaten Illinois and Michigan, again, two of the top Big Ten opponents. And Taylor Mikesell had 31. Cody McMahon had 22. They just continue to roll, still unbeaten on the season, still off to the best start in program history. They're back in action this weekend on the road, so it'll be another week and a half or so before you can see them at home. But you might want to see them at home because about halfway through or a little after halfway through the Ohio State men's and Ohio State women's games on Sunday that were happening simultaneously. I was like, I have chosen poorly by choosing to stay home and watch the men's game instead of going to attend the women's game in person. The men, things did not go quite as well for them, especially in the second half. They were up at halftime and then gave up a 14-0 run early in the second, ended up losing 80-73 on the road at Maryland. Tony Gerdeman is my guest this morning. And Tony, this is not the deepest team in the history of college basketball. They play a pretty good rotation, but when you're missing a guy like Zed Key on the road, that's something that you're gonna notice that.
Yeah, and I guess, Tom, what you should have done is watch the first half of the men's game and then go to the women's game, and then you would have seen two great halves of basketball. But yeah, Ohio State without Zed Key, starting Felix Akpara, a true freshman who does everything he can, and he's going to be a good player, but then picks up 3 fouls in about 5 minutes of play in the first half. So then you've got Eugene Brown playing center. You've got Ice Likely, Justice Swing, anybody that can kind of is taller than 6'2" and able to put their arms up and defend. That's what Ohio State was down to at that point. And they did enough in the first half. They led 39-34 at halftime. I think a lot of that was because Maryland's offense went away and Ohio State shot like 6 of 11 for 3. And you can't expect those two things to continue in the second half. And they certainly didn't.
They definitely didn't. And this was a team, without Zed Key, with Felix Akpara and foul trouble. We saw this against Purdue on Thursday. Eugene Brown is a good player, but Eugene Brown is not someone who is going to be able to hold up defensively against some of the bigger players in the Big Ten. That's just, and you're asking him to do something that is just like that. That is not what he was recruited for. So that is not, it's not like he is failing. It is just he's being thrown into a kind of a difficult position. They got killed on the glass, and I'm just looking up right now. 40-26, they got out rebounded during the game. And when you're missing shots in the second half, they went through a long dry stretch to start the second half, and you're getting one look, and then the possession is over, and the Terps got a couple looks and a lot of possessions, and were able to cash in on it. That just kills you. The other thing that killed them was pressure. This is the second game in a row where we've seen teams kind of throwing at least some token pressure on the Buckeyes, and there were stretches where the Buckeyes did not deal with that real well. Bruce Thornton had a couple turnovers and the charge early in the second half as part of that run, that 14-0 Maryland run. That feels like something where they talked about it on the broadcast. If you can't make the opponent pay for pressing you, you're going to see that press a lot more throughout the course of the season and throughout the course of the game. And that feels like something that they're definitely going to have to get figured out at some point.
Yeah, and I think Ohio State maybe only scored like one basket off of that press where it was, crisp passing. And they had some issues with it in the first half, but they were able to overcome it for the most part. But then they started the second half, I think, with 5 straight turnovers, and they weren't all a result of the press. I think maybe 3 were. But it also seemed like the refs were like eagle eye watching Bruce Thornton because they called him with an offensive foul trying to get out of one press, called him on a travel on another, which, we'll see the replays or whatever, but usually they're pretty lenient about that stuff. But, they were rewarding Maryland for their efforts, and I don't have a problem with that. And it's interesting where you've got a team that is basically all guards, all guys who can bring the ball up the court, have such issue with pressure and not being able to handle it. Maybe it's because you've got guys that are 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", who can bring the ball up the court, but aren't necessarily supposed to, or they don't necessarily do it well under pressure. If they're doing it against a 6'7" guy themselves, they're fine. But when they're doing it getting trapped, that creates an issue. And of course, freshman point guard Bruce Thornton, who's going to be very good, is already good. But asking him to break it himself is a tough ask. And Maryland made the most of it, and they were able to get some easy possessions, more offensive possessions, basically, than Ohio State. I don't think Ohio State shot their first field goal attempt in the second half till about the 16:39 mark or something like that before they finally got a shot off. And you can't do that on the road. And this was a game that could have been a steal for Ohio State on the road. And anytime you can get one of those, you got to. And they couldn't withstand the pressure, the inevitability of the home team run. Maryland shot 61% from the field in the second half. Only took 5 3-pointers because they were able to get anything they wanted down low because of Ohio State's lack of size. So this is just a really smart offensive attack from Maryland to get what they needed. And it's like they almost knew, like, if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're going to be fine.
And this is a relatively young Ohio State team. They started 3 freshmen in this game, and there were long stretches where the freshmen looked like freshmen. Bryce Sensabaugh finished with 22 points, which was a team high for the Buckeyes. But, 7 for 18 from the field. So this was not the best Bryce Sensabaugh game we've seen. He also ended up fouling out at the end of the game. But they just you had
4 turnovers.
4 turnovers. You had Felix Akpara picked up 3 fouls in just 12 minutes of play on the floor. He really was just sort of a non-factor because he went out, he had 2 fouls, went out and immediately picked up a 3rd foul. And Bruce Thornton was in foul trouble. He had 3 fouls during the course of the game. It looked like a team that was, this is a team that has really not played a whole lot of tough, true road atmospheres. They played at Duke, and this is Maryland is not exactly the most daunting road atmosphere this year either. But you're anytime you're playing away from home, especially in a true road atmosphere, you're gonna that's something you're gonna have to sort of learn to do, and they were kind of forced to learn to do it in without Zed Key. That probably hurt them a little bit. This was one of those games where at the end of the year, whoever wins the most Big Ten road games is usually the Big Ten champion. And this was a winnable Big Ten road game. This is a Maryland team that started 1-3 in the conference. This was one that you kind of looked at and went, yeah, maybe they could steal that one. And they looked like they might steal it for about half. They were up 39-34 at the half and then just couldn't close it. Fell way behind and then almost battled back, but not quite. This is also a team, Tony, where they do it with offense. The offense has been very consistently one of the best in the nation. The defense has not been one of the consistently best in the nation. So when the defense is struggling and then the shots aren't falling and you're not getting rebounds, that just feels like there's almost no way to win it if you can't get, if the defense doesn't pick up and the offense doesn't pick up and you're not able to crash the glass. It's like, boy, that is a very, very tough path to try and win a game if you have all that stuff working against you.
Yeah, and when you're having to move guys around defensively to play a position up, that's another thing where you're not even able to defend the position you normally defend. You have to go defend a position taller than you when you don't have the size, and it just makes things more difficult for everybody. But this was one of those games that got away from Ohio State, and yet it was a 14-point lead and felt like this could be a 25-point loss. Maryland led by 14. They led 60-46 with 9:41 to play. Ohio State got that back down to 3 points. Several times, like 3 different times, they got that lead down to 3 points. So we still haven't seen, I think, Ohio State just completely fold yet this season. And I think that's a pretty good sign. They still have not been able to get over that hump necessarily and win one that maybe they shouldn't, but to get it down to 3, and they never really felt like they were going to do it, but they just kept getting close and getting close and getting close. And I don't think they ever had the ball down 3. I think it was always down 3, and Maryland had the ball, and they would get fouled and go to the free throw line or something like that. Ohio State committed 28 fouls to Maryland's 18. And Maryland, of course, shot many more free throws, but overall, like, it's a road game. We've seen, like, everybody just eventually gives up or collapses, and yet this team didn't do that. So I think that's not a moral victory. I think it's one of these things as well. That's a good sign when you're down 14 with less than 10 minutes to go on the road, afternoon game. You could go ahead and give up because you're undermanned. Your starting center is not playing. You're getting banged around. You could go ahead and just give up, but you've got, like, Roddy Gale comes in and gives you good minutes. Bryce Sensabaugh is still fighting. These young guys aren't ready to just fold yet, and so they're helping to drive some stuff, and they're allowing they're kind of setting the tone at times where they don't know that they're supposed to give up at this point, where the veterans already maybe would have on previous teams. So I think it's a good mix, and they're still continuing to fight. So I think there's a lot to like there.
Yeah, and we'll see how long Zed Key is out. It does not sound like that's going to be a very long-term thing, but will he be back? The next home game is Thursday against Minnesota. Will he be back for that? We'll have to see. Then they're at Rutgers on Sunday, at Nebraska the following Wednesday, home for Iowa, at Illinois, at Indiana versus Wisconsin, at Michigan versus Northwestern. Like, these are all winnable games. There's nothing there that is particularly daunting for this team right now, especially if you do get Zed Key back. Probably the toughest game in that stretch is probably at Rutgers, and you may remember the home version of the Rutgers-Ohio State game, which ended on that Tanner Holden 3 at the buzzer, which I'm going to guess you will see that replay and hear about some of the controversy around that play when that game rolls around. But it definitely still a winnable, a stretch full of winnable games ahead for Ohio State. So we will see when Zed Key is back and how the Buckeyes hold up throughout all of that as their young core kind of continues to develop and take shape as they sort of try to build up a positive trajectory heading into the heart of the Big Ten season. So that is going to do it for today. We will have more Ohio State basketball talk. I'm going to say probably some more Ohio State women's basketball talk coming up this week as well as plenty of football talk. There's a lot of stuff to talk about there with coaching and transfer portal and recruiting heading into signing day, NFL draft decisions, all of that stuff coming up this week at BuckeyeHuddle.com. So make sure you check that out. And as well as our YouTube channel at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle, where we'll be talking about a whole bunch of that there as well. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.